We'll begin with introducing Madeline McCullough. Madeline is the Sustainability Policy Program Manager with the National Housing Trust. Madeline advances clean energy policies that reach multifamily affordable housing nationwide and helps providers access clean energy resources with a focus on affordable housing developers, contractors, and owners. And joining Madeline from the National Housing Trust is Leslie Zarker. She is the Director of Sustainability Policy at the National Housing Trust. Leslie leads the National Housing Trust DC Healthy, Green, and Affordable Housing Initiative and advances clean energy policy nationwide to benefit underserved communities. She brings more than 18 years of experience in scaling high-performance upgrades in multifamily housing. Before joining NHT, Leslie managed the Better Buildings Challenge, the multifamily sector at ICF, and I'm going to interrupt myself and just, Leslie, can you just, I should have asked you that. What is ICF again?
Actually, that's its full name now.
Oh, okay,
It's
so
a
what?
consultant that runs the Better Buildings Challenge for Department of Energy.
Oh, a consulting firm. Got you. Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry about that. And she also supports HUD and the U.S. Department of Energy and previously held roles with the Building Performance Institute, or BPI, a lot of us know of, and the Green Healthy Homes Initiative. Next, we have Simon Andrew. Simon is the Executive Director of the Housing Fellowship, which develops and manages 212 units of affordable housing in Iowa City. Simon has partnered with the JANSEN Clean Energy District to conduct energy audits and install energy-saving upgrades such as LED lighting and low-flow shower heads across their properties. Simon also serves on the board of directors for the Housing Trust Fund of Johnson County and Johnson County's Affordable Housing Coalition. Next, we have JODI ROYAL-GOODWIN. She is the community developer and director of the city of Muscatine. JODI leads housing and community development initiatives that use data and community engagement to guide equitable policy and investment. She brings extensive experience from her previous role in Reno, Nevada, and continues to champion quality, affordable housing and strong local partnerships across Iowa. Next, we have Mark Frank. And Mark is a board member of the Linn County Energy District. Mark is a retired University of Iowa IT director and a former engineer for General Motors. He has seen he's been an renewable energy advocate since 2000. He's an early adopter of Iowa solar and electric vehicles, and Mark now focuses on innovative solutions like balcony solar for renters and expanding clean energy access beyond single-family homes. So, Mark, we're glad you could be here today. He's a last-minute member of our panel. So next we have Debbie ACKERMAN. Debbie is the Community Building and Engagement Manager and Johnson County Coordinator with Hawkeye Area Community Action Program, otherwise well-known in Eastern Iowa as HACAP. Debbie oversees affordable housing, weatherization, and energy assistance programs serving low and moderate income renters, and also serves on the board of the Johnson Clean Energy District. And then finally, we have Curtis Nelson, who is a recently retired farmer and a board member of the Cerro Gordo Energy District and also a board member of the Clean Energy Districts of Iowa and Iowa Citizens for Community Improvement. Kurt brings firsthand experience with challenges for low-income and marginalized Iowans. He knows a lot about what those folks face in affording rent and rising utility costs. Though through his volunteer work with Catholic Charities, jail and prison ministries, and drug court programs, his service on multiple boards, he has championed equitable access to energy and housing resources across the state. So, wow, isn't this great? What a very full and robust board of our panel of experts here. It is just a real pleasure to convene this and bring you all together to kind of talk about this program and hopefully bring awareness to others in Iowa and maybe even start cracking the nut of this problem that we have. Really, it's not unique to Iowa, but we're going to focus on Iowa's challenges today. So now we're before we launch the actual discussion that Jacob is going to facilitate, I just wanted to, I think what we're going to do is set the table briefly with some slides, but I also know that we do finally have a room full of participants. So what we're going to do is, again, sort of set the table here a little bit. Then we're going to have this discussion. Questions you can put into the chat. We'll have a main question and answer session sometime after about 1:20 and around 1:30, and then we will kind of feel out the opportunity and the need for breakout sessions. We have some breakout sessions that we will have each panelist be available to, and participants will be able to click into those breakout sessions if that seems necessary at the end to just have a more small local conversation, if that makes sense. So I will share the slideshow. Is that what we're seeing right now? Are you seeing a slideshow, you guys?
Yes.
You got it.
Okay, so well, here we are. We're going to talk a little bit today about energy burden relief for Iowa's affordable housing residents. Renters pay the energy bills, but they don't have the power cost to control, or the power to control those power costs. All right. So what I want to do here is just give you just a little bit of background about the clean energy districts of the clean energy districts and the clean energy districts of Iowa, that network. So clean energy districts are nonprofit organizations right now that are organized in 15 counties, one in Iowa, or one in Wisconsin, and the rest 14 in Iowa. You see those counties listed there in the middle, but each clean energy district is organized by their county lines, and they're created to strengthen community by leading, implementing, and accelerating the equitable and local transition to clean energy use. We believe that local and inclusive clean energy districts equal strong and resilient communities. And this is one of our projects. So let me get into it a little bit. But at the bottom line, energy districts believe that the barrier to thriving communities is the number one barrier to a thriving community is energy drain. So energy districts are present to represent their entire communities, especially those who are energy burdened, residents of affordable housing especially. These are pictures of just little snapshots of energy districts at work. We do a lot of different things. We're on the ground working to talk about the clean energy transition and removing energy burden. Energy burden relief for Iowa's affordable housing residents is addressing about 1 million residents of Iowa. As far as there's an energy district in these 14 Iowa counties, the population of those counties totals about 1.2 million Iowa residents. So our dream with this particular project is in Iowa is that no household will be energy burdened, and all new and existing housing is powered by clean zero emission energy. That affordable housing developers prioritize electric ready and energy efficient construction and rehabilitation. Local voices will guide this just transition to climate friendly housing solutions that improves everyone's life in all communities. So this is the current landscape that we set out at the beginning of this project. And that is that the Midwest Building Decarbonization Coalition seeks to develop and implement an equitable strategies to achieve zero emission from Midwestern buildings sector by 2050. And the clean energy districts will continue to lead this statewide education and outreach effort through 2025 to promote decarbonization and energy efficiency within Iowa's affordable housing sector. And affordable housing is not truly affordable when residents face high energy costs. Clean Energy District subgrantees of this project will continue to grow local capacity to advocate for and implement strategies that reduce energy burdens while advancing decarbonization. So we're working in partnership with Midwest Building Decarb to execute this project. So I'm going to let Jacob take it away from here.
Yeah, and I'm going to go quick since, as Jolene said, we are spoiled with a number of good panelists today. So just wanted to set the stage a little bit before we get into that discussion. A little bit about Midwest Building Decarbonization Coalition. We were founded in 2020 with the mission to develop and implement equitable strategies for zero emissions from the Midwest building sector by 2050, which certainly includes affordable housing and rental housing. We work across 8 Midwest states, including Iowa. You can see our footprint there. And I myself am based in Des Moines. So if we go to the next slide. Just again, to kind of set the stage a little bit for this discussion, when we talk about a vision of an equitably decarbonized Midwest and making sure that folks do not get left behind in that transition. We know from the first place that we just have a shortage of housing across the Midwest region to begin with, and we need to acknowledge that before we talk about how they're heated and cooled as well, recognizing that we're not even close to the number of affordable housing units we need to meet the needs of extremely low income renters. And then also acknowledging, as Jolene alluded to, that although they may not control what utilities are provided to their housing units or what types of heating and cooling systems they have, over 90% of renters are responsible for their utilities. And I believe around 70% of cases, that includes not just electric, but secondary heating fuel as well, whether that be natural gas or propane. So certainly they are on the hook for the energy that gets used to keep that space livable. It's not included in their rent. You'll hear the term energy burden thrown around quite a bit during this discussion, I'm sure. So for anybody on the call that's not familiar with it, it is simply the percentage of that household's annual income that goes to their energy bills, right? So however much money they have taken in, what percentage of that goes to Mid-American or Alliant or Black Hills or whoever they're paying their utility bills for. So with that percentage, generally in the industry or amongst advocates, once you get over 6% of that household income going to utility bills, that's generally considered high energy burden. Anything over 10% is considered severe. And we know that across the Midwest, we have a number of states that are trickling into that high or severe range. The lowest state for average energy burden for low-income renting households is Minnesota, and they're still at 4%. And we have some states like Michigan that we work in that are almost averaging in that severe range. I was kind of in the middle, but certainly we know that most low-income renters in the Midwest are going to have a high level of energy burden. And that screenshot is from what used to be available from DOE as a tracking tool. If anybody on the call happens to know where that might still be available, not through our federal government, please let me know. It was very handy to have when it was available. But I think that's all I had, Jolene, other than I will highlight that in addition to working with CEDI on this, if we go to the next slide, Midwest BDC has a ongoing affordable housing working group. We meet the third Tuesday of each month to discuss some of the things that we're talking about from a regional level. We recently had some good news I'm happy to answer other questions about later about Iowa's affordable housing tax credit program. So if you'd like to continue being a part of this discussion along with Midwest BDC, I'm happy to have you there. But we should get into our panel discussion. So I think I'm going to kick off with our friends from National Housing Trust, just to kind of give us the 1,000-foot view of how Iowa kind of fits into the national and regional landscape, and just ask Leslie, like in general, how do energy burden rates for renters in Iowa compare to what you're seeing across the Midwest or other parts of the country?
Sure thing, Jacob. Thank you so much for having me. I'll just say, as you said, first of all, households spending 10% or more of their gross income is considered severely energy burdened. And in Iowa, that rate is nearly 16% for low-income households eligible for LIHEAP assistance. So that's the Federal Low-Income Home Energy Assistance Program. And that 16% compares to an average of 3% of household income for non-low-income households in Iowa. And looking at nearby states, Iowa's low-income energy burden, it's certainly well over that severely burdened threshold of 10%. But it's within range similar to its Midwestern neighbors. So for example, Wisconsin's low-income burden is at 12%, Minnesota's is at 13%. And then on the really high side, Indiana is at 24%. And then Missouri, Illinois, Michigan, and Ohio are somewhere in the middle. So one reason Iowa may not be at the higher end of that spectrum is that Iowa's investments in wind and solar projects over the past 2 decades or so may have helped keep electricity rates affordable. Iowa leads the country in the percentage of electricity it uses that's generated by wind, which can protect against fossil fuel price spikes and help with pricing stability.
Thanks, Leslie. I'm going to kick it over to Jody because I know you had some thoughts on this question as well, based off of the experiences you've had working with renters in Muscatine. So, what's your feel for how Iowa renters are experiencing this issue of energy burden?
I think part of just staying along the why are we a little farther behind, I think part of it is if you look nationally, our housing stock is often much older without the incentives, and incentives is not the right word, without the regulatory framework for maintaining or requiring the infrastructure of a home to be upgraded in an efficient way. So we don't have tools in the toolbox to get landlords to make those types of improvements. And again, like you said, there's no incentive for the tenant can't do those or can't afford or won't do those. And so then there's no incentive on the flip side for the landlord to do it because there's no demand from the customer, the tenant in these cases, demanding that because they're just in need of housing. There's not a housing stock availability that they can, that's their focus, right? I need a place to live at the most affordable price, and the rest of it kind of comes later. So that would be my basic take on why we have this disconnect for Iowa itself. And I'm sure that's many of the same issues in the Midwest. I just work in my little corner of the world, so.
No, sir, I appreciate that, Jody, and I think that was actually a good segue to a question I wanted to pose to Curtis, who I know is working directly with a lot of folks that are in some of these like emergency situations, like I just need shelter, I just need to get these basic needs met, and maybe that idea of like I might be coming into a situation where I'm going to be having trouble with my utility bills at some point. That's a secondary concern maybe until it's too late. Curtis, I'm wondering what your thoughts are on like how can we get some of those voices of the folks that are directly affected by this to be a part of the solutions that we bring to reducing energy burden?
It is difficult to get some of the people that I deal with to actually speak up. they don't want to participate. They don't want their struggles to be known in some cases. I worked with a young man who was having a hard time getting his rent paid. We were able to go through Catholic Charities and raise most of the money, and then I was able to scrounge up the rest of it to get his rent paid. Then we had the problem of his utilities. They had not been transferred into his name, and the landlord was ready to kick him out because the utilities had not been transferred, and he was unwilling to pay the utility bill in the meantime. Of course, you wind up with the problem then of having to come up with a deposit before you can get the utilities hooked up in those situations. There's a lot of complicated things to try to resolve. I've gone to some of the governmental agencies, and the rules are such that some of these people, I couldn't get them qualified, and I don't really understand why.
No, yeah, certainly there's like a lot of combining and amplifying issues that are intersecting with each other with this, ranging from, emergency needs to just, shame and dealing with it. So thank you for speaking to that, Curtis. Madeline, I'm curious if there's anything that advocates or folks working on this space in Iowa, is there anything we can kind of learn from the neighbors of like states that have done better to start kind of cracking that issue that you draw attention to?
I think as much as you can kind of standardize policy across the state, so you're not having to worry about kind of county or local barriers. I think one big thing in kind of standardizing issues that could address energy burden is through your state's qualified allocation plan, which is how tax credits are allocated. There's ways in there that you can incentivize projects to have high performing buildings, which means that the buildings perform more efficiently and utility bills are lower. And in those cases, it's less money that residents are having put towards utility bills. Same with third party building standards. The overall quality that the building is being built to or preserved to will overall help keep costs low for residents. Obviously that applies to tax credit properties, but there are standards that can be applied to other buildings as well.
Yeah. We're kind of dancing around it. Maybe we can kind of get directly into it of, how do we start addressing this idea of like split incentives, right? And in a lot of cases, the folks with resources or power over the things that would reduce those energy needs and those energy bills are not the ones paying them. We've heard about why the folks responsible for paying the bills on for these utilities might be hesitant or have difficulty pursuing some of those improvements. How do we start drawing those things together? And I'm gonna start with Simon. I know we talked a little bit about the work you've done around the Johnson County area with your units, and maybe we can kind of start with you and go around of how we might start addressing this split incentive issue.
Sure. Most of our properties were either constructed or acquired using tax credits or HUD funds, so community development block grants or home reinvestment funds. And those programs, as well as the housing choice voucher program, so Section 8 vouchers is usually the shorthand used for that, have a utility allowance calculation. So there's a maximum rent, and then the landlord has to back out average utility costs. And I do think that there is an opportunity in how those utility allowances are calculated to perhaps give landlords more of an incentive to improve the energy efficiency of those buildings. Certainly through the QAP, as Madeline said, that's a kind of low-hanging fruit because in those cases you can effectively require it for projects that would get approved for tax credits. But for those that are already in service or are not tax credit projects, I think looking at that utility allowance could be a way to kind of have less of a split in those incentives between the landlord and the tenant, because in the cases where the tenant pays those utilities, even if, I mean, that's the crux of all we're talking about, right? Is the landlord, even after the utility allowance, wouldn't get the benefit from that. And then the other pitch that I would make is publicly owned or nonprofit owned properties have a different incentive than for-profit, say, tax credit projects. 90% of new affordable housing units in the country are tax credit projects, and most of those are for-profit developers. In most cases, they're either re-syndicating when the compliance period ends, or they are selling those units. And they're more concerned with the short-term cash flow, whereas a nonprofit owner is more concerned with, in general, we're going to own and maintain those for as long as that building is in service. So we have more of an incentive to have an increased value in that property, not just the cash flow in the near term. So those are the two things that I would think, at least from the subsidized housing perspective, that could help crack that nut.
Yeah. I'm going to pause quick just to do a abbreviation definition for anybody that's feeling a little bit lost. Qualified allocation plan, if you're not familiar with the world of affordable housing, that's what is being referred to when folks are saying QAP. And that's basically the rules that the state uses to determine what projects are going to get tax credits on their affordable housing developments. So that's a really key thing for developers that are looking to build those sorts of projects as part of their financing. So baking requirements to do certain things like higher levels of energy efficiency in that can really be motivating for developers to build to that higher standard that's going to benefit renters in the future. So no offense meant to Madeline or Simon. I just wanted to make sure folks were following along. Debbie, I wanted to bring you in on this split incentive question as well. Since obviously you kind of do bring that community organization perspective on this, and just sort of your thoughts on maybe how we can do better of bridging that gap.
Yeah, absolutely. So with those split incentives, we just always want to make sure we are working with landlords and that those folks really understand that when they are when they're improving their housing stock, that they're not then looking to increase rents. We that just zeroes out that effect for the renters when they are, having those improvements to their homes that are increasing the value of their homes, maybe decreasing their energy costs, but yet then their rent might go up. Looking at just incomes and looking at the expenses in our area, and actually across the country, we know that all of our costs are going up and our wages are staying stagnant. So making sure that we are able to level set those things and be able to, again, keep in mind those issues for renters always needs to be at the forefront, looking at their cost burdens for, energy, for all the things that our monies are going to now is really important. It's a tough sell for landlords because they are not necessarily in the business of ensuring that their renters are able to afford the bills. They're in the business of renting homes. And so, that is some advocacy that we can do on the ground to really help folks ensure that their housing is affordable.
Thanks, Debbie. Mark, I think you're the only one we haven't heard from yet. So I wanted to throw that question to you as well, of just, initially getting into this idea of the split incentive of addressing these energy bills, how we might start attacking that here in Iowa.
Well, one of the things I've begun to look into is something we refer to as balcony solar or plug-in solar. Solar is a way to not just address their energy usage this month, but for every month that people live in an apartment that has any access to solar, so apartment that has east, west, or south facing apartment. So our focus is on trying to provide energy that they create or produce themselves to subtract from the amount that they owe the utility company. And this is being used very effectively in Europe right now. Germany, they call it balcony solar. They have something like 1.5 million households using that as a way to reduce their average obligation for energy payments. So our question here is in Iowa is what would we have to do to enable that? And the incentives is a really serious issue for that. The balcony solar is modestly priced in terms of comparing it to like a whole house solar. But modestly priced still means about $1,000. And for low income renters, $1,000 is not so easy to come up with. So figuring out where the incentives fall to provide that ability to generate their own electricity is a really important issue. The nice thing about balcony solar is it's simple. It works when it's unregulated, so there aren't a lot of permits or inspections or things like that to do. All the equipment is plug and play. You install it on your apartment, and it's portable. If you ever move to a new apartment, you can unbolt it from your balcony or however you've installed it, and then take it with you, so that it's basically an investment that will last 20 or 25 years for that person to reduce their need for grid electricity by generating some of their own.
Thanks, Mark. I think the example of balcony solar, specifically is really interesting, but I think you also touched, Mark, on a broader issue when we're talking about energy burden for renters, and that's what types of incentives or financing or things like that are typically available for addressing energy efficiency or renewable energy. And I think what we see a lot of is programs from utilities or maybe state or federal programs. They tend to be aimed more at homeowners and maybe higher income homeowners at that, and not maybe in a form that is accessible to renters or for the things that would be most useful to low income renters. I'm curious, maybe I'll throw this one back to Debbie, just because I know you're working directly with weatherization and things like that. Like, is that maybe a fair categorization or of what we're seeing in Iowa, or any thoughts on that of like with the programs that are out there in terms of incentives, is there room for improvement to make them usable for renters?
Yeah, absolutely. So, it's exactly what you said. A lot of times renters are unable or unwilling to make upgrades for energy efficiency in their rental homes, despite the fact that it could help reduce their costs. A lot of times, especially with people who are living with low incomes, they don't have that capital to put forth, to buy those upgrades and then maybe get a rebate later on. They just don't have the access to those funds. And again, especially for renters, they're not going to see a return. They're upgrading those the homes that they don't necessarily own. What we've seen in other communities too is being able to, instead of doing like a rebate, using that money instead to hire contractors to go in and just automatically make those updates. That has been successful in some other places. And then looking at how we can partner, with those utility companies and with landlords and other folks to ensure that those upgrades are made. That's that's all I got.
No, that's good. That's good. Debbie mentioned things that are maybe being successful other places. Leslie, are you seeing other modes of delivering programs from utilities or maybe from the state, other places that might be useful to advocate for in Iowa?
Yeah, so a really good start, I'm thinking, is to advocate for Iowa to establish an energy efficiency low-income working group. So for example, in Michigan, in Minnesota and Missouri, we successfully advocated through the EFA coalition, the Energy Efficiency for All coalition, to establish low-income working groups, which are really forums to discuss policy and program implementation of low-income energy efficiency incentive programs. So they bring together representatives from the utilities, the State Public Utility Commission, Office of the Public Counsel, and then also community-based advocacy and environmental rights groups, so frontline groups as well. And one example, a really good example, is the Minnesota Eco Income Eligible Working Group, and I have a link that I can drop right there into the chat. And the idea behind these working groups is to break down silos between frontline community organizations and the utilities and the state agencies and regulators who are supposed to be working in the community's best interest. And really, these groups are about building relationships. It's like anything, the real work happens when you know people and when they trust you and they trust your intentions and they trust that you know what you're talking about. And really, that's the most effective advocacy, is when you can build these relationships. And I'll just say one key thing for these groups is that for the frontline community groups to show up consistently, it's important to offer basic stipends, because when you think about it, everyone else in the working group, like the PSC staff, the utilities, the government folks, they're all being paid to be there. So it's unrealistic to expect people from the neighborhood groups to always show up as volunteers. They do need a participation stipend, and it's important to include that in a working group budget. So like in Minnesota, the working group is sponsored by the State Energy Office, the Department of Commerce. They put out an RFP for a facilitator to facilitate this working group and to provide, all kinds of outreach to community groups to join. And it's quite an effort to make it robust and make it really inclusive, but it's worth it.
I think that's a really good point, Leslie, that it's important to reimburse people for their time, especially, we're looking at them as the experts. We're looking at them for policy recommendations and for sharing their lived experiences. I'm really glad that you brought that up, and it is very important.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, Leslie. I'm going to double back to some of these things in a bit, but I'm going to pivot a little bit to build off of that. And I'm going to throw this question to Curtis. Like, as Leslie said, like when we're talking about housing development programs or energy efficiency programs, it tends to be the folks that are working in those industries that show up to talk about those rules. Maybe you'll get a smattering of environmental groups in there as well. But Curtis, from what you've kind of seen in your community advocate role, like, is anybody showing up to currently in Iowa to give that renter and tenant perspective on these things? And if so, who is doing that currently, and how can we, support and expand that?
In Cerro Gordo County, we tried to put on a program aimed at landlords to understand some of these problems. The day before this was to happen, there was an issue with one of their tenants trashing an apartment, causing a lot of damage, and we could not get anybody focused on the real topic. So it can be very, very frustrating and very difficult. As to who's showing up on this, I'm not really sure I can speak to that. We're trying to work with the people. I mean, I feel like I'm just stomping out brush fires a lot of days working with people and not being able to address the longer term solutions that are out there. And a lot of our people would be capable of doing things like weather stripping, doing the things in their apartments if they could come up with the money to somewhere to acquire these products.
Yeah, no, that is totally fair, and I think needs to be acknowledged as part of this discussion as well. Actually, I'm going to bounce around a little bit more. Jody, I think maybe I'll start with you on this question, and that's, you know, I think we've touched on something that if you asked a lot of renters, you know, do you care about your housing being affordable, they would say yes. But if you started straying into asking them about, like, well, do you care about your energy burden being low, or do you care about the air quality inside of your apartment, that's going to start to seem very far away. But obviously those things also heavily contribute to their household costs and you know, and income situation. So, you know, how can we start framing that as more central to this discussion and not sort of like this side thing to keep getting kicked down the road?
I think first, so you're right, they don't make the connection, but I think sometimes that's the words we use. And when we think about it, right, so you're asking about their energy burden, and I think you can ask the same question. Do you want, is your utility bill too high, right? Like, what is that? And then talking about how to lower that. I think that the air quality, I mean, you have to start to tie at a very basic level. So it is a lot of educational components to get that message across, because you, like, you'll get calls about mold in my unit, and it's really mildew because they don't turn on the fan when they shower, right? And so, or it's that when it's super cold and you get the condensation inside the not sealed up windows kind of thing. And so they don't understand how that ties, and then how that ties to their bill, and how that, and then putting the whole, they just feel in crisis day to day because none of it's affordable, right? And they're not in control of any of it, is how they feel. And so I think that we can work at educating them, but I do think one of the issues is that the incentives we provide, and we're talking, so right now we're talking about affordable, and we've talked some about the subsidized units, and those really start at a higher place, whether they were built 20 years ago or they're built today, they still had a higher place, especially in Iowa, because we as a state haven't placed value on the energy efficiency or the renewable components of construction. And quite honestly, the builder community and the landlord community have such loud voices against them that we don't make any progress when we do. So one of the things a few years ago we had a long debate about, which just frazzled my mind, because it was about window screens. And in the rental programs and market rate and affordable, with the inspections, window screens were required. And all of the landlords were like, why? Why do we have to? They just tear them out. They just break them up, and then they just cost us more money. And why should I have to have window screens if I have air conditioning? They have a way. Maybe they don't want air conditioning on a 70-degree day. Maybe they want to have fresh air in their house, and it shouldn't just be the air that's coming in when it's not supposed to, right? So we even had to come up to negotiation on like, okay, how about one window screen in every room, right? Because we had 5 council meetings with landlords coming and talking about why that was unreasonable to require. So I do think one of the things we have to do is educate the policymakers on why it's important. And ideally you would have tenants coming along, but I think that is more of a stretch because you have to educate them at the same time, but also because they're living in a day-to-day that they're overwhelmed, and to think about coming and talking to council or to a state legislator or even in front of a group like this about what they're experiencing is overwhelming, and they back off, right? So I think that that's the biggest issue. Like, we can start to provide education, and we happen to have a housing counseling program where that's kind of the stuff we talk about, the whole big picture, right? We provide a rental class and we provide a homeowner class, and we kind of marry them into financial and budgeting classes. But I don't think that will get us the systemic change that we're really looking for. We can take their testimony and present it, but I think it will have to be presented by other, I mean, don't get me wrong, you might get lucky and have an engaged resident that feels strongly enough to do that. Maybe they got a sick child because they had such a badly insulated property or whatever, that will change. But I think that the big changes come from, and on my community development side, is being able to make the cases where the bare minimum isn't acceptable, right? Like, we on a city level have to require some energy efficiency improvements or some renewable, like whatever that standard is. Like, where do we get the teeth to actually enforce that, similar to the way the QAP does? The QAP might provide incentives, but the majority of housing, it is the majority of housing getting built in our community right now. But in Bettendorf or Iowa City or Des Moines, it is not the majority, and that's what's going to make a bigger difference, because the majority of renters are still living in those units, not the affordable units, unless they have a voucher, and in which case the voucher doesn't have any say over that, other than potentially helping with, you can charge a higher rent that doesn't cost the tenant anymore because their share of the utilities is less.
Yep. No, yeah, there's a lot of unfortunate truth there, and I think one thing I want to underline, and it's why Midwest BDC has spent so much time on the developer tax credits and QAP stuff, is it's like we got to stop digging the hole at least, because what we already have existing is such a going to be such a pain to deal with. We don't need to keep creating new issues. I'm going to pause and just see if anybody else had anything else that they wanted to add to what Jody had said. Otherwise, I'll shift gears a little bit. But I see Simon coming off of mute, so I'm going to hand it over to him.
Thank you. Yeah, we have had some success in working with our current tenants that may be moving on to unsubsidized units, and helping folks understand, and this is how we report all our numbers, that housing costs are your rent plus utilities plus transportation costs. And that's how we understand the cost of living in any given unit. And coaching folks on that is helpful when they're looking at a rental cost to rental rate, to make sure that they're including what the average utilities for that type of unit could be, or you're going so far as to look up what the average utilities have been in that unit in the past. Now, again, that's not getting at the systemic issue, as Jody said, and as somebody mentioned earlier, you have to have another option to go to before that matters. I think that probably the biggest key to all of this is more housing. When renters have the choice of a huge range of options, they're going to gravitate toward the ones that are either cheaper in rent or cheaper in utility costs or what have you. So I think the crux of all of this, in terms of housing affordability generally, and I think could get us more to the energy efficiency end of it, is just more production of housing generally. And sometimes those are understood at odds with one another. You know, every energy efficiency requirement you put on that house, it might incrementally increase the cost to the builder a little bit. But having a level playing field across the board, you know, that'll all shake out in the market eventually. And the other thing that I wanted to mention before that we leave here is we have had some success as well with our student build program. Our last student build was certified LEED Gold. It's a program where the community school district provides pre-apprenticeship training and certificates to high school students. They build the housing fellowship, an affordable home that is energy efficient. And I mention this because I think that having that skilled tradesperson the workforce that is trained and understands and pitches to their customers, whether it's new technologies and energy efficiency or different building techniques. We have a lot of contractors that are resistant just because they haven't done it before. And the more students that we can get involved in the field, I think that that could help turn the tide a little bit. But again, that's not a silver bullet or an overnight solution, but I do think that that's a critical piece of it.
Yeah, I'm gonna soapbox a little bit and underline what Simon said. The next time anybody on this call is involved with advocating for a higher building standard, whether that be minimum code or standards for affordable housing tax credits or some local tax credit program, and the contractors and home builders show up crying about how hard that's going to be, and they will. You just remember that Simon said a bunch of students were able to build LEED Gold housing, and they are perfectly capable of building things to these higher standards if we insist on it as a state. So, yeah, Jody.
I was just gonna say, I think Simon brings up a good point about the whether, like, I'm just thinking about when a water heater goes out, whether it's in a rental unit or a homeowner unit, right? Like, if you can have the new professionals, the skilled trades coming in, and they're like, we recommend this higher efficiency product rather than just, oh, here's the cheap one, right? Like, here's the one that is equivalent to what you got, and is this is the price of it. Like, that change tweaks. It's kind of like the 401k conversation, right? Like, if you're automatically enrolled versus you have to elect to enroll, like, you have to make the honest choice of choosing not to. And I think that will be something that this current younger generation, I guess there are a couple of them below me, so I should verify that 20 and 30-year-olds right now, that they're really putting the premium on this. And I think it will help drive some of that.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. One thing we hadn't touched on yet, and I do want to make sure that we acknowledge it. Assuming we make our case so well and everybody gets on board with addressing these things, we kind of dance around a little bit, but I'm curious that those of you that are directly working in managing affordable housing or helping with programs that do energy efficiency upgrades, can we just have some like frank comments on like why it's so important to build this stuff right the first time, because of how complicated and difficult it is to do these retrofits after the fact. And whoever wants to take that softball first, but I think we should be acknowledge that like on a technical as well as like a policy level, like this is difficult stuff to get done.
I think
A lot of,
Simon's
sorry, go ahead, Jeff.
Go ahead, Jody.
I was gonna say, I think Simon's the only one building. The units we have are 40 and 50 years old. So I can only talk to trying to retrofit, which both of them are public housing. We did finish managing a HUD multifamily recently, in which we did, I hope, the right thing and change from the standard boiler system to a VRF system. which with the intent of it being both more customer service oriented and more efficient. Unfortunately, we don't manage that anymore, so I can't actually tell you how that worked out. But it was 700, it was $750,000 5 years ago to do that in a property that was valued at less than 3 million. So that's a big thing. I mean, on our public housing properties, we are currently at that place. Are we replacing the boiler system? What are we doing? But the things we can do beyond that are simply the change out the ballasts in the lights, change out the, and those things come over time. But then you get to a point, and we are lucky enough to have MPW that partners and wants to help do those things. But for us, they're like, there's not low hanging fruit left. Now you're to the big stuff, right? So, and what does that look like, and how do you fund that, which becomes more of an issue in a 50-year-old property, public housing property anyway.
Right.
So yes, it's very technical and very difficult.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. We do have new construction that we do, but the majority of our properties, especially the ones that aren't tax credit properties, are very old. We have properties that are as old as the 1850s and 1860s, and generally were a rental before we bought them. And so, oftentimes a lot of disinvestment in those systems. And if we purchased it using public funds or a public loan, we're already capped on what rent we can charge. And so sometimes it's just financially infeasible to do the upgrades that we want to do in an older home and still be able to charge, $700 a month in rent, as opposed to maybe that home's going for, $1,200 or $1,300 at market rate in Iowa City. So sometimes, yeah, it's just financially infeasible based on the age of the home or what systems already exist in there. And those are the units that we leaned into. It was mentioned in the introduction with the more of the weatherization and lighting and shower heads and what have you. But those major upgrades usually depend on some sort of low interest loan, housing trust fund, public loan to be able to do a significant rehab. And that's always going to be at tension with the other upgrades we maybe need to do to the house. If there is commercial debt tied to the property, those interest rates are generally variable every 5 years. And so being able to keep paying our mortgage on the capped rents can be a challenge. And that's the job, is figuring out how to do that. But it's hard to imagine a for-profit developer in our same boat looking to do that. Our mission is to keep that family in that house and keep all of those costs in totality as low as possible. But if that weren't our mission, it would be likely cost prohibitive in a lot of cases.
And I think at the same time, so the rehab piece of it, and then the new construction. So even if you can get that, let's call it free money, right? The home and the CDBG and stuff, to do new or substantial rehab, then they have the per unit cap. And the way prices are right now, you often are butting up against that just to get a unit online. So if there could be potentially like an inflation factor, if you're doing certain improvements that are energy efficient or renewable or whatever, that would up that amount, so you could actually do those and get additional non-repayment subsidies, so that you still have the loan part that's for those other components and keeps the rents manageable.
Good. Well, I want to make sure that we leave space for Jolene to uplift any questions that we've been getting in the chat. But I also don't want to end on too much of a downer note. So before we get to questions, let's maybe we'll just do around the horn of, if you see one opportunity worth pursuing for improving this situation in Iowa in the next 2 to 3 years, or maybe where would we focus? And we'll try to keep this like action oriented. So let's start with Leslie, and then we'll just kind of work our way around.
So one thing, one like policy.
Pick your favorite.
Okay, I'll pick my favorite. If it's one thing, then it's these programs, these energy efficiency programs, and this is specifically for multifamily affordable housing, that the programs offer project management and one-stop shop technical assistance to the property owners. Because as I think Jody and everyone has mentioned so well, affordable housing staff are already wearing like 7 different hats. They're stretched really thin. And they just don't have the bandwidth to be adding expertise in these kinds of green retrofits to their portfolio of work. So the most effective multifamily programs are those that offer comprehensive project management and technical assistance to help owners through the green retrofit pipeline. And this covers everything from managing the energy audit process to helping to identify those incentives and braid different funding sources, helping them develop scopes of work, helping develop bid-ready specifications for the contractors, and identifying qualified contractors, and then providing QC inspections for the work being installed. It's all absolutely essential. It's not just the incentive itself. It's the assistance through this pipeline of work that multifamily owners really, really need.
Madeline, anything else we're seeing nationally? And then we'll kind of talk to our Iowa contingent of what's on their wish list for the near future.
Yeah, I would definitely just echo what Leslie said, but also add that we can get creative with regional groups, nonprofits, and state and local agencies to make sure that we are filling the gaps where there might be a lack of support or shifting priorities at the federal level. There's a lot of opportunity for state level advocacy that we can really tap into to make sure that programs and policies are really targeting and benefiting those most at need. And that's where you can really dive into the state specific and you have that flexibility versus at the federal level where they're trying to serve every American across the country.
I just putting an order on my screen. Curtis, any final thoughts or calls to action?
Well, I don't want to end this on a downer, but this is one of the real tragedies we have this as November is coming. This is when people have to start looking for supplemental heat in their houses. And we had a horrible tragedy in Mason City in 2022, where 4 children were killed in a house fire that was caused by a malfunctioning electrical power strip. So what I'm trying to do in drug court is just educate people about those dangers. And we send them, there are places where they are, the people who are having drug problems are required to go to Prairie Ridge or a place like that counsels them, and they teach them how to budget their money, how to do things on their own, how to think their problems through, hopefully with some combination of that. And then when I talk to landlords, I point those things out to them and explain to them that their insurance costs could maybe be a lot lower and their turnover rates would be a lot less high if they would do some of this weatherization and just the simple things, change out the bulbs with efficient light bulbs, all of those things that would help their renters.
Yeah. There's no reason why both sides of this can't benefit from getting some of this done. Simon, any last thoughts from you before we go to questions?
No, I just really appreciate the conversation. And again, I feel like the sustainability advocates and affordable housing advocates are pitted against one another in a way that I don't think is necessary or productive. Again, I think the answer is the same to both questions, and that's increased density and less travel times and less sprawl, and that's how we get it more environmentally friendly communities and more affordable communities. And I do think that there is an appetite, especially as the affordability crisis moves up the income scale, that we have more just kind of natural advocates and constituents. It's unfortunate it takes that to happen, but it's just affecting more and more people every day, in both cases there. So I do think that there is an opportunity to get more folks on board.
Okay. And I'm going to go Mark, then Jody, and then have Debbie end us off here.
I like this idea of energy teams that can go out and actually help renters deal with some of these issues they might not understand, and would really help them and try to pick the low-hanging fruit that is available to do. Are there such teams now? Do we have energy teams that at work to go out and help renters with this?
I'll answer the question quickly. That is what I think the Clean Energy District movement endeavors, is to be that to be that source of technical assistance at the local level, based on county lines. And two of my colleagues have indicated that in the chat, but we do have a federal grant that we're working on. It's an EECBG technical assistance program. And Abby Steffens is leading that program for the Clean Energy Districts of Iowa. So yes, and also not to all of a sudden take the mic real quick, but Leslie's suggestion mid conversation here about these working groups. And again, those are going to happen. That kind of stuff could be something that we could see in Iowa if using energy districts to sort of assemble them like what happened with this meeting today. Is we are living in each of our communities, but we're endeavoring to lift up the common message of affordability and the clean energy transition that's inclusive. So yeah, Mark, I think that's, sorry to take the mic there, but I think that is what my colleagues would want me to say at that point. All right.
All right. Jody, and then Debbie, and then I think we'll still have some time for questions at the end if we had any.
I think my one wish list thing would be a state policy, one legislation, and then subsequent policies to prioritize energy efficiency, renewable energy inclusion in construction projects through the building code. And I say at the state level because that way it will trickle down and we don't have an opportunity. We might raise that bar, but we at least have a standard, and then it can trickle through the state programs a little better in how those provide the incentives, knowing that it is the state priority. And I think that can happen again through more collaboration. I like the idea of this affordable housing working group. I've already pulled up that link, and then tying that group to the Iowa Housing Partnership, and then the NARO group working with those folks. And so all of that collaboration starting to happen to prioritize this for all of our tenants.
Yeah. I'll just throw out there that it's been over a decade now since Iowa updated its state building code. So there is ample room for improvement on those minimum standards.
They actually just effective September 10th of 2025, they moved up IBC 2024.
Oh, okay.
Didn't announce that anywhere, but we just learned that last week.
Oh,
well, they kept that under lock and key. That
I'm telling you.
Great news. Yeah.
And they adopted it a year ago.
Yeah. So. Well, thanks for bringing attention to that. All right, Debbie, and then we'll see if we have any questions.
Yeah, I think we need to look at this as a twofold problem. We're looking at affordability and ensuring that we have programs that are looking at improving that housing stock and making it more energy efficient, and ensuring that the utility companies are able to provide services at an affordable rate for all of our community members. And then also ensuring that assistance programs are still available for people who have low incomes, things like LIHEAP, LIWAP when it was available, and other programs that are locally run, like through the utility companies themselves. I think if we're able to address both those things, then again, it'll improve conditions for the entire community.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much. I'm going to bring Jolene back in here. I've kind of been looking off to the side as we go, but Jolene, is there any questions that have been percolating in the chat that you wanted to kind of raise up here? Otherwise, if folks did have any quick questions for the panel, I think we have time for some of that.
I don't think there's any priority questions. There was one that Carrie Carney had from the Polk County Energy District, and that was just the idea of piloting this. Oh, let me get back to her exact question here. Or Carrie, are you able to voice your question? But the idea of looking for a municipal utility. Oh, and that on balcony solar, which is a really interesting idea. Mark was sort of talking about that actually earlier today at our Clean Energy Districts of Iowa board meeting today. And also he kind of articulated this on not necessarily an affordable thing, even though it is affordable, but not for those that are living in affordable housing. But the idea of we cannot just all of a sudden start advocating or implementing that in, for example, the state of Iowa, where we have a regulated utility, for-profit utility company. So what I was going to say, though, and what Carrie was suggesting is where there is a municipal utility that is the king of their domain, so to speak, if that might be a place to pilot something like balcony solar. So JODI was where I thought we might go, because Muscatine proper is in a municipally owned utility.
Yeah, I think we could investigate that with MPW, the city, and the Housing Assistance Council that we have started for these purposes. So I do think that's something we could look at.
Mm-hmm.
Whatever
It's an interesting idea. And certainly Muscatine is not the only municipal utility. There are 136 municipally owned electric utilities in Iowa, which is actually a little bit above some of our neighboring states as far as municipally owned utilities. And some of those are near and dear to, again, our energy districts. And there happen to be 3 municipally owned utilities here in Clayton County, and we have built relationships with them. Again, that maybe that is a place to start. That at least maybe you pilot it, you see, they even might be able to put incentives in place, working with some of the housing, the multi-unit housing owners and that kind of thing, and develop a program like that and just see if it works on a pretty small scale. So that was the main. I think the rest of the questions were any questions in the chat were more comments. So we're coming up on 2:50. So I am going to have to make an executive decision here to say that we aren't going to be able to do our breakout sessions. Unfortunately, because we want to honor our panelists' times. So we're going to just have to do a free-for-all here. Everybody's welcome to come off mute and video. Maybe just raise your hand if you would like to place a question out into the main here.
Yeah, we do have one question in the chat that I'll kind of
okay.
throw out as well. John was asking, to what extent are we seeing affordable property managers assist renters with understanding things that they can do, like window coverings or smart thermostats and things like that. Are there best practices for talking with your tenants about that, and are they happening? I guess is the question. So that's probably, again, maybe a Simon or Jody or Leslie. I see you with your hand up as well.
I'll just say there's some great resources for working with your residents of your properties, whether it's single family or multifamily. There's Enterprise Green Communities, Enterprise Community Partners has some wonderful resources for helping your residents conserve energy. And then also Stewards of Affordable Housing for the Future, or SAFE. also has some great resources that any affordable housing providers can access online. These are free resources online that they can download, all sorts of templates and games and competitions you can do with your residents to see who can save the most energy. It's quite impressive. All kinds of stuff.
Yeah, I saw Michelle from Enterprise in the room at some point. I think she's since left, but I will plug Enterprise has a really great decarb resource hub for property managers, including like an Ask the Expert forum thing. So if anybody is involved in those and had like burning technical questions, that's a great place to go for that.
Yeah, that's great. Craig, is that you with your at your watch party over in Johnson?
Yeah, I'm just thinking about, it's my understanding that we're still expecting the state to release some of the IRA rebate money for low-income folks to do and all kinds of this work. And could that be used for balcony solar if we get that through the legislature?
Yeah, so the short answer to that, Craig, is no. Pretty much all of the IRA rebates that we'll see that Craig's referring to were aimed at like energy demand reduction, so things that would cause the home or the housing unit to use less energy, and things that were considered like energy generation, like solar, were pretty explicitly left out of what was allowed under those rebates. So unfortunately, that's not going to be an option there, and you know, other things like solar for all and some of the national green bank stuff continues to be in limbo with the administration. So yeah, it's fuzzy at best what's available right now for some of that.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah.
And
I will add.
oh,
Yeah.
Sorry.
I was gonna also, oh, sorry, Madeline. Yeah, go for it.
No, that's okay. I was just going to add that even though the Solar for All grants were terminated, I know that the Solar for All awardees have been talking to each other and kind of figuring out what are ways to pivot and think about other ways to support solar for low-income households. So there could be some interesting pilots or grassroots groups coming up and trying to, or prior awardees trying to, you know, think through ways they can still get solar out to local households. So I would just be on the lookout for any efforts to do pilot projects in your state or in your region. That could be something that's coming through next year.
Well, that's great to hear. And knowing that you're now connected to Iowa this way, it'll be great to maybe hear more from you, Madeline, if you have your finger on that pulse. So that'd be great. Thank you. So John Zakrasik, who's the chair of the Lynn County Energy District, is asking this question in the chat. Are there incentives for property owners to use the resources that we talked about earlier here to educate their renters on how to save energy? And he also has another question, and are there states that require affordable property owners to advertise their energy efficiency on their available units? That idea of benchmarking scores and that kind of thing, which I have seen in other states. But yeah, so the idea of resources, is there any incentive to distribute these resources? Leslie, do you have that answer by chance?
Not often. Sometimes it can be worked into the long-term agreement with the state finance authority for tax credit projects. For instance, and this can run across a number of services, but we have a tax credit project that is specifically tailored to folks with developmental disabilities. And as part of that, we agree to provide a certain amount of information and have a standing contract with the local service provider that tenants can use that service at no cost. So I would imagine that would have to be part of the application process, at least in Iowa, for IFA to require that with a tax credit project. But I would imagine in other states, especially those that are more committed to energy efficiency goals, that's a requirement, but I don't know that off the top of my head.
And I was going to say, I've seen with single family homes, states that require the home energy score. It's a score from 1 to 10. It's very easy to understand, related to a quick energy audit. When single family homes are being bought and sold, but I do not know of similar requirements to disclose energy benchmarking to affordable housing residents, particularly in multifamily.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know there has been in past years a push. Oh, Carrie Carney would know who it was. There was a property manager in Des Moines that was really pushing for state legislation that would require like disclosure of an average utility bill for the building at time of lease. And I know there are other cities or states that have those types of requirements on the books. Unfortunately, it hasn't gone anywhere in Iowa. And then the other way that we've seen that be addressed is, like Jolene said, if there's a city or state, benchmarking ordinance for buildings over a certain size, if that requires multifamily residential to comply with that, then there would be, that statewide database that has those energy scores for those buildings. Again, unfortunately for Iowa, the legislature has kind of put obstacles in the way of additional cities passing that sort of thing. I believe technically the Des Moines ordinance is not out of bounds with the law that the state passed a few years ago, but it's kind of had a chilling effect on implementation from what I've heard. So the short answer for John is like, yes, there are states that do that. I think some of the state things that we've seen other places do would unfortunately probably require some changes to state law in Iowa.
Yeah, that transparency, that stuff that we've talked a lot with the ratepayer Bill of Rights and that kind of thing. And yeah, that is a piece of legislation that did come up, and it's not that it's not been burned up. It probably just needs to be advanced. Oh, and then Steve put a link to a House file.
Yeah, that was back in 2019, House Study Bill 635, and I put a link to that legislation.
Yeah.
We'd really like to see that brought back up again, because that would disclose to potential renters what an average one-bedroom apartment would pay in utilities in this building, or an average utility bill for a two-bedroom apartment. And that information is available. Utilities put up this big smoke screen that said, oh, we can't do this. This is too much information that we just can't calculate it. Well, that's, a bunch of, malarkey. They do have that information, and they can easily provide that for the disclosure, but they just didn't want to do it. So
yeah, they're going to need to be compelled, is
right.
What you're saying. Yeah. Yeah. When in a situation where they have all the cards, it just seems like not too much to ask. And again, it's something that it's not something that energy districts won't champion when it comes to be that time of the year again. And John had another question, and I think it could be for Simon or for Leslie. Do any states require affordable housing property managers to pay the utility bills of the renters like HACAP does? Like HACAP is paying for the utility bills. Are there anybody, is that a thing?
Not that I'm aware of.
No, me neither. I've never heard of that.
Good question. All right.
And
Yeah.
HACAP does it because they're providing supportive housing for people recovering from homelessness.
Yeah.
So, which is standard practice for permanent supportive housing.
Permanent supportive housing. Yeah. Thank you, Jody. Yeah. Well, Jacob.
Yeah, it's about that time, huh?
Yeah. Yeah.
Well,
Wow.
again, I want to thank all of our panelists for making time for this discussion today. And it's really useful to kind of bring folks together and kind of bounce some of this off of each other and talk some of these things through. So really appreciate that. Unfortunately, we did not solve it all this afternoon, so I encourage everybody to stay engaged. Hopefully, you maybe learned about some new people or organizations working on this issue in the state that you want to stay in touch with and keep tabs on. I will drop the link shamelessly for Midwest BDC's Affordable Housing Working Group one more time. I know we've had great participation from CEDI folks on the things that we've been working on, but certainly encourage you to stop by and be a part of that and see what we're doing and making progress on in other states in the region as well. But yeah, everybody give our panelists their flowers in the chat here. This is really great discussion. I'm glad we were able to make this work for everybody.
Yeah, it just was ideal. So thank you all very much for your time and your energy. This has been a big project for us to organize, but gosh, it wouldn't have been a project without your expertise. So thank you everybody who showed up and was willing to take some questions. So it's certainly the beginning. So the light got shined today. So thank you very, very much.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, thank you everybody, and we'll see you again soon. Take care. Bye-bye.
Everyone.
Thanks.